There's a wonderful quote from Thoreau where he says, I believe there is a subtle magnetism in life, which, if we unconsciously yield to it, will guide us aright. And that is our magnetic field being connected to the one, not just Earth, but the whole cosmos. It's all one song. And we're a part of it, but we've lost our way in thinking that we're separate, and we have all these layers of noise between us and that essential harmony. But when we start to break down that noise, then that sense of connection opens back up.
Hey everyone, Stefan Burns here with a very special video for you today on the human biofield and the energetic aura. And I'm joined by none other than Eileen McKusick, who is a pioneer in the field of biofield tuning. She wrote the book, Tuning the Human Biofield. She's been practicing this for more than 15 years, originally starting as a massage therapist, actually went back to college so she could put some science behind the practice of biofield tuning so she could better understand the amazingly transformative and beneficial health benefits and healings that are possible with biofield tuning. We go into all that and much more. For example, we talk about earthing and grounding. We discuss the Schumann resonances. We also talk about astrology and how we're connected to the earth and the cosmos and so much more. So if you like these sort of topics, then you're going to love this discussion that I have with Eileen McKusick. Let's get right into it. Eileen McKusick, here we are. One of the first names that I was introduced to when I first got into this kind of more spiritual realm and community. So it's really great to finally connect, actually to have you comment on my channel, because it turns out you're a viewer. And then here we are. Let's talk about biofields, grounding, everything. Let's go. Welcome to the channel.
Nice. Thanks, Stefan. Yeah, I was up early on Sunday morning watching one of your videos, and you said something silly about the sun. Yo, I got you. Like, that's just such a cute and funny thing to say. So I wrote that in the comments, and you were like, hey.
Yeah, sometimes I think that we can kind of put a little bit of emotion and character into these celestials, and I don't think they mind. I think that's not a bad thing to do sometimes, to personify things. It helps us understand the energy, just like an intuition as well. But yeah, I mean, just to give you my quick story with biofield tuning is that when I was making decision when to split from like a normal career path and something that was more just kind of free form and open, which ended up being traveling, the YouTube channel and more, that was in Washington back in 2021. And I was kind of thinking about all these things, and I had a biofield tuning at that moment in time by my cousin's friend. I was staying with my cousin in Washington. Her friend does biofield tuning. And so your book was there. I mean, she had all the tuning forks, and we were talking about you and everything. And so your name was in my consciousness pretty early on. And you've been doing this for a long time. So how long have you been biofield tuning, and kind of what got you into it, and how did you even discover that you could use tuning forks to work with someone's energy field? Is that something that has prior history to it? Are you the progenitor of all this? I'm very curious.
Well, it was back in 1996. So I started reading self-help books, science and spirituality, stuff like that, human potential, when I was 18. So back in 1987. And anybody who is a researcher and curious about life, and you find that one topic leads to the next, and you kind of just follow this trail of crumbs. And my trail of crumbs brought me to vibrational medicine, and the idea that everything is vibration, that physicality is an artifact of human perception, and that basically everything is waves, which means I'm waves, you're waves, and it's all waves. And then this idea of vibrational medicine, which is treating waves with waves. And it just made a lot of sense to me. It seemed very logical. So I went out and I bought every book I could find on the topic, and there wasn't a lot on vibrational medicine, the use of color, sound, music, and healing. Maybe I ended up with 4 or 5 books. And as soon as I got to the end of that stack, I got a catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing. And it was the C major scale. And I believe it was Biosonics, John Beaulieu, who started experimenting with tuning forks in the 80s, and also Jonathan Goldman. So that they were really those sort of precursors in the 80s of sort of my lineage, if you will, what I was downstream of. And at the time I was doing massage therapy part-time. And I just decided to experiment with them with some of my first, some of my clients. I was you asking them if they wanted to be a guinea pig, and they're like, sure. So, lots of people say to me, I have tuning forks, but I don't know what to do with them. And I didn't know what to do with them either. They came with this really little simple instruction book, and it was the C major scales. It said, do you C in the root chakra, D in the second, E in the third, and so on. And so I just started doing that. I started playing with them. And I had some early experiences that were really like mind blowing, like so unexpected. I had this one guy who one of his shoulders hurt a lot. And so I was like, well, let me hold the tuning fork over it and see, see what happens when we do that. And the sound went really sharp. And then I held it over his other shoulder and it sounded normal. I put it back over here and it sounded sharp. So I just kept activating it in that spot. And after a little while, it kind of sounded like the other one. And then he got off the table and he rotated his shoulder and he was like, all the pain is gone. And so neither one of us were expecting that, right? That was a complete surprise. And I discovered that when I moved the tuning forks around the body, that they would sound different in different areas. Like some places they would go really loud, some places they would go really soft or sound like they were sucked in. Some places they would get kind of warbly or full of static or noise. And when I first started telling people about this, they were like, oh, that's just room acoustics. That's just the Doppler effect. And I was like, yeah, I get that, but there's something else going on here. So I just kept exploring, but this was in Connecticut in the 90s. And so when I told people I was doing sound healing with tuning forks, you can imagine the kind of response I got. People were so skeptical. They were so dismissive. They were so like, I've never heard of that. Like, what nonsense. Like, it was really, and for years, actually, that was how people responded to me. And I never wanted to actually become a practitioner because of the way that people reacted to it. There is something about tuning forks that just seems so like uncomfortably woo-woo to people, right? So pseudoscientific or hippy-dippy nonsense. And I'm actually an incredibly logical, practical, grounded person. So being perceived like that was just not how I wanted to live my life. And so, but it was intriguing. And so I kept doing it and I did it as a hobby for 10 years. From 1996 to 2006, I see maybe one or two people a week, if that. And I was in the food business. I owned a restaurant and then I owned a specialty food business. So that was like my main gig. And this was just a side gig. And it was just sort of a continuation of my own sort of esoteric healing arts, human potential education path that I was exploring on the side. And I also made another really intriguing discovery, and that really formed the basis of what Biofield tuning is. So if you think about having chakras, what are they? They're energy centers, right? And so if you're going to have an energy center, that's probably where the most amount of energy should be, is in the midline of the body. So I discovered that sometimes it would sound like really quiet, like right over the chakra, but then it would sound really loud, off to the side of it. And I discovered that I could use the tuning fork like a magnet, what I call click, drag, and drop. And I could sort of hook in, I'm going to just get a prop here. I could hook into the loud spot and I could actually drag it to the chakra and drop it there. Click, drag, and drop. And then it wouldn't be loud over there anymore and it would be loud here. And so that was this little practice that I created. People come in and I would just, find their loud spots, put them in the center, and anything that sounded atonal, I just hang out with it till it didn't anymore. I call it harmonic balancing back then. And then one day in 2006, I made a discovery that changed everything and brought me here right now with you, was that I discovered a loud spot in the field, like out here on someone. Because I'd only been working over the body, right? It never occurred to me to like go out there. But on this particular day, I was working with a woman and she had this sense of pain and pulling in her jaw and her neck and down into her shoulder. And she'd tried all different kinds of approaches, acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, and nothing had been able to resolve it. So somebody told her about me, so she came in. And I had been holding the fork right over the area where the pain was, just sort of listening to it. And all of a sudden there was this big noise out my window. And at the time I lived in a giant meadow on the top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere in Vermont. Like there's nobody around. I'm like, what is this noise out my window? So I go and I look at the window and there's nothing there. It's odd. But for whatever reason, when I came back and I started walking towards her, I activated the fork from maybe 4 or 5 feet away. And I started walking towards her with the fork activated. for no particular reason. And I got to be about here, and all of a sudden the fork went loud. And then it came out and it got quiet. And I was like, what's that? That's a loud spot. Put the fork in it, come over here. So I'm standing there trying to figure out what to do. I'm like, what do I do? What is this? And what do I do? But then I realized that I've been bringing everything right into the chakra, the midline. So I did, and I clicked on it and I dragged it the whole long way and I dropped it. And all of a sudden it was like so loud over her throat. And she called me the next day and she said, Eileen, all of that pain and pulling is gone, which was, so intriguing. So now I was like, well, what is going on out there? And so the next people that came in, I started going as far away as I could in the room and exploring, and spent the next 4 years exploring this territory and discovering that our biofield, as I understand it now, but I didn't have that terminology. I didn't even know we had an electrical system back then. That it actually has a very specific anatomy and physiology. And I mapped it and I discovered it was the same from person to person. And this whole understanding, it was sort of like blind fumbles in the dark with like momentary flashes of illumination. And then this whole pattern started to come together. And then I discovered plasma, electric cosmology, the fact that the body had an electrical system, the term biofield, and I was able to start to put together a hypothesis about what I was encountering and what was going on. So, and then that led to my first book and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you just learn a little bit, and let's say you're talking about the tuning forks and healing people, or at least making them feel better. If you just get that data, it can sound a little odd, or just like you just don't know how it would work. And so ideally you have an open mind and you just like, oh, I like to learn more. But as we know, a lot of people just kind of shut things off. But what I've found is because I had to do a lot of research into a whole bunch of different things. So, I discuss, for example, space weather often on my channel, but I've done a lot of research into bioelectricity and just biology and all these things. And so by having this kind of wider perspective, it's helped for me to kind of connect everything together. And when you do that, then all this stuff starts to make sense, because this modality here won't have the information that's needed to really flesh it out completely for your understanding, but this understanding or research over here will. And so chakras, very simply, a lot of people still are kind of ignorant as to the existence of chakras. But that's been pretty clearly shown now that chakras are just points on the body. They're not just this, but one way to describe them is that they're points on the body with a lower electrical conductivity. Or higher electrical conductivity, lower resistance, higher conductivity. So the energy naturally kind of flows there. And you can measure that, and it's not a difficult measurement to do, and a lot of people have done that. And so we know that these sort of things exist. And then from there, you can build out to the more maybe mystical understandings of chakras and energy and the flow and such. But one question, while we're on the topic, you were mentioning drag and drop and everything. It's just, you have your own biofield as well. I'm sure some people are wondering how you're working with someone else's biofield when yours is there as well surrounding yours. Of course, you're probably cleaning your biofield all the time, but they are also going to be interacting to some degree. So to spend maybe just a couple minutes discussing that to clear that up for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we do as practitioners is we very consciously go into a place that we've called hollow bone. It's a neutral witness, where you take yourself and you just kind of leave yourself at the door and you show up as a deep listener. So we've all had experiences when we've been talking to someone and they're talking, but we're distracted and we're thinking and not really paying attention, right? That's an example of your own biofield getting in the way of communicating or listening or hearing to somebody else, because our biofield holds our thoughts, our feelings. It's what we call mind, subconscious mind. It's where all our memories are. It's your sense of self. Your sense of I is the light, the electric light that runs through you. When you're alive, your light is on. When you die, your light goes out. So this is sense of self. And so we seek to quiet the noise in our own signal and just listen very deeply. And of course, your own stuff is going to get in the way. And in some ways, what it does is whatever is going on in you is going to resonate whatever is going on in someone else. because the biofield is full of huge, it's all of your memories. It's your ancestors' memories. Like there's so much information in the biofield that when you take a comb through, you're only picking up certain things, the things that have more energy, that have more resonance, right? So if I've had an experience that's resonant to something you're experiencing, that's what I'm likely to encounter, right? So there's no way for me as the witness to not be informing what is happening between us, just like in a conversation, right? I can't make myself go away entirely. But the more quiet you are inside, the more deeply you can listen and really be present and take yourself out of the equation. And so that's part of our education, is how to quiet the self. And it's actually a super useful practice, because when you do tuning, and there was a time when I used to be like 40 hours a week in an office, like seeing person after person after person, this insanely busy practice that I had to stop because it just got too crazy. That your brain gets trained into an alpha state. So you learn to be able to quiet your mind. And also listening to other people's stories, because combing a fork through the biofield is like dropping a needle on an album and listening to the vibrational record of someone's life. And that all of those vibrations are a language. So this is one of the things that I sort of discovered and decoded, is that the body, everything is vibrational in our bodies. Every emotion that moves through you has a particular waveform that, as it ripples through you, creates a particular sound, if you will, and we can hear those sounds. So if you're very, very, very sad, and I hold a tuning fork off your left shoulder, that tuning fork is actually going to reflect that sadness. We're going to hear the sadness in the tone. And I think the reason why the tuning forks have this ability to make the inaudible audible is because the waves coming off the body are extremely high frequency and extremely low amplitude. But those intersect with the extremely high frequency and low amplitude overtones of the tuning fork. And in that wave intersection, it precipitates down through the octaves into the hearing range. So it essentially allows us to hear the waves coming off the body. You know, just like that guy's shoulder, anything that's like working properly sends off groovy vibes, and anything that's like is going to send off waves that are reflective of that. Just like your car, right? A good mechanic can tell what's wrong with your car just by listening to it. And it's the same with tuners. You learn that language. You're like, that's arthritis, that's a strain, that's a move, that's a breakup, like that's anger. Like you just learn how to identify all these sounds and know what they are.
Yeah, I would like to get more into, hopefully, the two of us putting some understanding around like the physics at play, but I'd also like to recognize that there's a little bit more than just physics here, because as you talked about, like quieting your own biofield, if that kind of wasn't possible, like suppressing your energy, then it wouldn't really work all that well, I would think, because the two biofields in a completely like inert way would just no matter what interact. So there's also spirit guiding this. I think we have to say that when we're in this sort of like discipline, you could say, there's going to be physics, and then it kind of bleeds into like metaphysics, which is where we start to not understand things, and like quantum potentials and just all this stuff that we really don't understand that well in terms of like our logical right brain. So I do want to go though into some of the physics about like how the metal, the fork is interacting with the electromagnetic waves, and because it's resonating at like an actual vibration as well, and the sound, it gets converted, as you said, step down into sound. Because you've done a lot of research into this yourself, obviously, to kind of put some of this into understanding, how do you think exactly it's working? I mean, we have this electromagnetic biofield generated primarily by the heart, but really by the entire body, like a symphony. And then you have this extremely conductive tuning fork moving it through. How does that work?
Well, you know, this was some of my really big questions that when I started to discover stuff, right? Because I'd be like, okay, well, when I'm combing through the field, it feels like I'm encountering mass. All of a sudden, it'll feel like it's a really weird thing. And it's fun to teach people this because they're just moving the tuning fork and all of a sudden it stops. And you're like, And of course you can override it, but there's like this sense of stickiness of like you've encountered stuff. And it feels like mass. It feels like an energetic jam up. And so it and the fork will also start to tell the story of what is there, right? And what I discovered is that these are specific memories. So in this model, your memories aren't in your brain, they're held in standing waves in your field.
Hmm.
And so when the map of the biofield is like your memories, so as you generate information, it moves away from you. So information I find close to your body is current or recent. Information I find at the outer edge of your field. So here's a torus, right? So
Oh,
there's
very nice.
a double layer plasma membrane. It's a bubble, a torus, and there's a central channel, and we draw a negative charge from the surface of the earth, hence grounding, earthing, and we draw positive charge from the sun, and these charges circulate bidirectionally through the whole torus, right? And so there's this membrane that we find. And the membrane was confusing to me because in all images of auras and things like that, you see the koshas, the different bodies, and there's greater density closer to the body, and as you go out it gets finer and finer, and I'd never really seen a model back then that had a boundary, but I was finding a boundary in the field. I'm like, that's a boundary, right?
Hmm.
And then I discovered that the information in that boundary was from gestation, and that just inside that was birth. And so if somebody is 40, I'm going to find information, memories that were generated when they were 20, about 3 feet away from them. So this is about 6 feet from the middle. And it's very specific. And if I find that information off your left shoulder where you tend to generate and store sadness, it's going to be a sad memory. And so every emotion has a particular area that it gets generated and resides in. Anger is in the liver, right? And so if I'm combing through your field in the area of your liver and I find something really stuck and really intense at 10 years ago, I'm going to be like, whoa, what did you get really angry about 10 years ago that you still have charge around? And the
Hmm.
person will know. They'll be like, that was when. And so, just this opportunity to hang out in these memories. So, what is going on? So, the tuning fork is acting like a mirror. So, the body is actually, this is what I've discovered, a self tuning instrument, and it's designed to be in harmony. And it wants to be in order, like it will do anything it can. It's always trying to keep itself in order, right? But we're always encountering stressors and things like that that kind of put us into dysregulation, disorder. So when you are in a state of disorder and you find a mirror and you see like, oh, your hair is a mess and you have a seed in your teeth, you use that reflection to start to bring yourself in order. You didn't know that seed was in your teeth until you saw it, right? In your reflection, and you can fix it. So that's what the tuning fork does. It's like a biofeedback mirror of like, hey, body, you're really sounding funky over here. And the body's like, whoa, I really am. And then it's also like a metronome because it's producing a steady rhythm, right? And so the body's got a mirror, it's got a metronome, and so it can start rhythmically and tonally because we really are music, balancing itself against the pure input of the tuning fork. So the tuning fork initially resonates with the pattern that is present, and then it entrains the body, it relaxes the body into a more coherent harmonic expression. And when the body relaxes, then that sense of mass or resistance gives way, the signal becomes more clear, and then you're able to take that charge that was stuck there, frozen there. So kind of like soul retrieval in a way. In the concept of soul retrieval, they say you have a traumatic experience, a bit of your soul breaks off and stays there. And we all feel like we kind of lost bits of ourselves along the way, right? And we've had taken this hit and that hit. And so when I first started really grasping what was going on, I was like, this is like sonic soul retrieval. Like I'm finding these soul fragments and I'm restoring them back into circulation. They come back into the center and they go back into flow. And the more trauma and stuck energy we have frozen in our fields, the less of ourselves we have available to ourselves, the less of our potential we're able to realize, right? So this is a
Hmm.
process of bringing you back to you and getting the voltage flowing, the resistance out of that flow, which enables the overall voltage to go up. And then suddenly there's, you're busting clutter and you're finishing projects and you're doing more because you literally have more energy. So that's what I think is going on.
So, I mean, you're clearly a sorceress with the wands because you've been doing this for a long time. Have you And as a way, like through these tune forks, you've been able to kind of build this idea and ability to see these things. Has that actually translated now to your other senses where you can start to feel auras and stuff even like without the tuning forks?
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely. I think I've always been that way. I think I've always been sort of more I was one of those kids, probably maybe you were like that too, Stefan, I don't know. That I was always told I was too sensitive. And I would just pick up and perceive more is going on than and often get upset, I guess. That's why I was too sensitive. But
Hmm.
I think a lot of us who were sensitive as kids learned to shut a lot of that down because it wasn't acceptable. And so this is really geared towards my nature, which is to pay deep attention, to really notice. And part of the reason why I do is because I really do care about my fellow humans. And I really don't want people to be suffering in pain or whatever they're suffering from if I can help them, right? So this deep listening, this deep paying attention really does come from a place of being so curious about people's stories and really caring about humanity and people's well-being, right? And you've got to have that in you, otherwise you're not going to do this. But there's such a huge reward because what's very cool about this is that as the noise in the signal resolves and the person's true tone gets amplified, what it has given me is a window to see how amazing everyone really is. Because once the pain body stories, the stuff that we carry around and that we identify as self, once that settles and the true music of you comes into this harmony, everyone is beautiful, everyone is amazing, everyone is great, everyone is brilliant, everyone. And I would see this in people and I would reflect it back to them. I'd be like, oh my God, you're so beautiful, you're so amazing, like in this way. And they look at me shyly and they'd be like, I need that, right? Because we all know that we are that. We know it, but we don't necessarily believe in it. So for me to have the ability to reflect back to people like how beautiful they really are, has been a huge gift. And to see that. But I'll tell you what, it took me 15 years of seeing that in other people, like daily, like all the time. And one day it dawned on me, I'm like, oh my God, that means that I'm amazing too. Like it's so hard for us to embrace our own amazingness, right? That I could see it in so many people for that long and be like, took that long for it to sink in that I was also that way, that we as humans, that is how we are created. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we're all like these magnificent Stradivariuses that have been terribly mishandled. And we're just out of tune. And when we get back in tune, then we start to get to experience that part of ourselves.
That's why I like biofield tuning, just like the idea of it. And I had a great experience with it too. I mean, the lady who did it, she zoomed right in on five. She's like, "What happened at five?" And I was like, "I don't. What did happen at five? Oh, my parents got divorced. Okay, that makes sense." And it wasn't top of my mind or anything, right? Actually, I don't really have any memories from there because clearly that wasn't a good experience for me as a kid. But I like biofield tuning because it doesn't have like much investment in terms like you can get the tuning forks. They're not that expensive in the grand scheme. And it can be used as a way to develop your own kind of sensitive and psychic abilities based on your experience and of others. Just by working with it all the time, you can start to develop those more ESP abilities. And then it also provides a tremendous service to so many people, and as you said, even yourself over time. So I just seems very efficient, you could say. And I think it's a great thing for people to either experience once themselves to have their biofield tuned, or to look into perhaps doing it themselves. So I know you do workshops. Maybe let's just go over that really quickly now in the video for anyone that's interested in this, starseeds, whoever.
I will say that I wouldn't necessarily call it psychic because we're using just regular senses, right? It's your fingertips that tell you when you've hit an area. It's your own understanding of your own inner emotional language to be like, oh, that's resonating sadness in me. Like I recognize that, right? So that I don't necessarily know that there's anything super extrasensory perception about it. It's just kind of like ordinary senses. It's sort of physics, this is going on.
Hmm.
Now, there is another element because the spirit really does enter into this. you know, and so, but I even feel like there has to be a scientific explanation or a law of nature for everything. That ultimately nothing is metaphysical, that there is no metaphysical physical divide or any of that. That everything that is has to have a law of nature that explains it. And it's only the Western mindset that has seek to disempower us away from our own natural telepathy, our own, you know, because we do this at a distance and people are like, well, how do you do this at a distance? And I'm like, okay, have you ever like suddenly thought of a loved one and then they text you? Like, how's that happen? Right?
Yeah.
Well, because we're connected non-locally and that we're antennas. And in a resonant ether, when we resonate in the ether, the collective connective medium that we are all made from, we are everywhere. We don't just end here, right? Because think about it. If this is your body and I can read you out here, if you are out here, where do you end?
Yeah.
Like you don't.
Yeah, magnetic fields don't have any technical ending. They just keep reducing in power via the inverse
Yeah,
square law. And
exactly.
then if
So
there's
it's
some
all
sort of, yeah, if there's some sort of barrier, it can guide that energy, but 6 feet is, or 2 meters is the distance that like a high sensitivity magnetometer can pick up the magnetic field. But then
yeah.
there's the electric field that also propagates out, and you're probably interacting with both of them with those tuning
Yes.
forks.
Yes, definitely.
And
And then
more, of course.
understanding the difference is something that I still want to tease out. But so
Mm.
we're still evolving the hypothesis of how, you know, said definitely not carved in stone, and there definitely is more to figure out and to describe. But in the meantime, you know, the hypothesis is working and the training is available. So we actually have over 3,500 biofield tuning students and practitioners around the world. Not everyone is in our database, but there are quite a lot of people out there. And our training is a two-part training that can be online or in person. And actually, there's some out in San Diego with you, Stefan. That's one of our areas where we teach in person. So it is an incredibly, even if you just do it for yourself, it's life-changing. It teaches you so much about yourself, about your own mind. But it's a 2-3 day training, and then you can become a certified tuner, and you can incorporate it into many other practices. Like we have doctors, nurses, chiropractors, other sound healers, massage therapists, all kinds of body workers incorporating the forks into what they're already doing, and it blends really beautifully. So you can learn about that on our website if you're interested in the training.
And that website is www.biofieldtuning.com. Anything else? Any other websites to mention at this point?
No, that's good. That'll take you into all you need.
And so to move a little bit forward, then not everyone will have the immediate opportunity to get their biofield tuned or to do the training, whatever. But I mean, as we've discussed very little, we have a lot of just in general energy right now on Earth, primarily due to solar activity and solar maximum. And this is the strongest one that we've had since the early 2000s. And so just based off of seeing so many people comment on my channel, my own experiences, and there's a lot of research on this too, there's just more energy kind of in our bodies as a result, and it's amplifying some of these maybe discordant pockets. And just what are some recommendations that you give for people to help them tune their biofield even without tuning forks? You have a lot of experience in exploration into earthing and grounding as well. So if you could speak on that, how to tune your biofield just kind of naturally as well to the best of your ability.
I have had so much energy this last week, off the charts energy, such high energy, such huge creative energy. I've been finishing all these things. I feel like a volcano that's exploding. I'm astonished with how much energy that I have. And I think part of the reason why I have so much creative and upgoing energy is because I don't have a lot of resistance in my field. I've had thousands of tune-ups. Like you can say, oh, I had one and that was neat. But if you keep going, and like the more you do, these sessions build on each other, you become lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter as you get more and more of this resistance out of your field. But interestingly, you also become more and more grounded at the same time. And a lot of it is because a big part of tuning is getting you grounded. if we're going to work with your body's electrical system, we got to plug you into ground. And so a key part of getting a tuning is that we use intention, we use the forks and your own mind to get you into a grounded place. So, it's an incredible liberation, honestly, the more that you do it, you just get freer and lighter. But in my case, now that we're having this solar maximum, and there's all this energy, it's really like coursing through me, almost too much. Like I couldn't have a second coffee. I just know that's not happening. But so there's plenty of different ways that you can manage your body's own electrical system without having to get a tuning fork in the mix. One is to really understand that our environment is electrical. I think most of us were educated into the model of solid, liquid, and gas, and plasma and ether were not part of what most of us learned about. And when I discovered plasma in 2009, it was this huge revelation. I was like, what? There's the state of matter? Like that I never learned about. And it's illuminated and it's connected. Like, what? How did I not know about this? And it really blew my cosmological story. Like it completely changed it from this sort of dark, separate, pointless winding down, right? Our cosmological story is grim and it's always running in the background, and they really have eliminated this creative, electric, illuminated aspect of reality. And even our breath, we're breathing a plasma. Our atmosphere is electrified, and you are breathing in charge. So why does your blood become bright red after it visits your lungs? Because it just got light put in it. Charge. Why do we want to go to the beach to recharge? Because it's an ionized environment. Or the forest bathing, there's more plasma there, and we feel energized and recharged being in those environments. So just understanding that if you're tired, go out in the woods, go to the ocean, take some deep breaths. If you're kerfluffled and wound up, lie on the ground. Don't just walk on the ground, lie on the ground, right? Not that long ago, my husband and I were having some fuss about something, and we were outside and we both laid down on the grass. And we completely forgot whatever it was we were fussing about. It just drained right out of us. If you're a place with snow on the ground, go hug a tree in earnest. Just like really feel it, connect to it. Let your electrical system connect with its electrical system, feel its roots, right? I think the biggest thing that we do in tuning through this process of this targeted relaxation of these subconscious tensions that you're holding from old traumas and inputs is liberate your breathing. And then when you start to breathe more fully, more freely, more gratefully, more expansively, then your life becomes more like that, right? So the simplest, most important thing that you can do is liberate your breath and breathe in more charge.
And so, breath, prana, air, it's kind of, it's of that element that's the boundary of like air and ether. And something else that's in that element, you could say, are like the Schumann resonances, which are also these very low amplitude electromagnetic fields. They exist everywhere. I'm sure you are aware of them. You have a tuning fork at the Schumann resonance. And so, and a lot of viewers on this channel, that is like their primary interest. It's one of my primary interests. So how does the biofield connect to the Schumann resonance, and speak maybe about the Schumann resonance tuning fork that you have and how that frequency in particular is beneficial. Of course, you have a whole bunch of frequencies for your tuning forks, so I'd like to hear about those as well. Mm-hmm. But the Schumann resonance is that natural earth resonance. It is a standing wave. If our biofield is made up of a bunch of standing waves that has all our memory and information in it, then Schumann resonance, is it a standing wave of memory and information for the earth itself, and how do we connect to that, and what's the bidirectionality there?
Right, that's a lot of questions. Yes, I got interested in the Schumann resonance again back when I was writing. I wrote a master's thesis. I went back to college as an adult. So when I made this discovery in the field and I started working in the field in 2006, my therapeutic outcomes became very dramatic, like very dramatic. And they'd already been really cool, but they were like, whoa. And so I was like healing people with pain right away and anxiety, depression. And I was like, whoa, like I'm onto something. I kind of feel like I have a moral obligation to bring it out in the world, but I'm like, God, I'm from Vermont. I'm an old hippie. I'm waving tuning forks around. Like, I better have some credentials. And I ended up going to college as an adult. And I wrote a master's thesis. And it was while I was doing the research for the master's thesis in 2010 that I came across the whole concept of the Schumann resonances. Just made a lot of sense to me. And you think about, that's your brain in like an alpha state, like a low alpha state. That's that sort of, I'm in deep listening and I'm feeling connected, right? You kind of start to blend into an awareness of connectivity with your environment when you're in that state. And at the time, I was using a weighted 128 hertz fork in my practice. That was the only weighted tuning fork I had. And I decided, when I learned about the Schumann resonances and the body's electrical system, thinking, well, because the Schumann resonance in this brainwave, like it's part of it, no matter what, it's part of our biofield, is this frequency and its harmonics. So I decided to have a tuning fork made that was based in the Schumann resonance. And you can't make a 7.83 hertz tuning fork because it would be like 4 feet long, right? The lower the frequency, the longer the fork. So it wasn't possible to make one in that frequency. So I decided just sort of intuitively to try 7.83 times 4, which is 62.64, which is this fork. So this is my very first custom fork that I had made. I just had a prototype made for myself. And then I'll never forget the first person I used it on, because with the 128, when you put it on the body, it kind of vibrates in the body, you know, like right there. And like, well, you feel it right there. The 62.64 went into the body and it kind of like went and found where it needed to go. It seemed intelligent to me. It made me think of, I don't know, people have cats and how some cats are like really cool and special and other cats are just like normie cats. I was like, this is like the cool cat of tuning forks. Like, what is this even doing? So I stopped using the 128 and I've never used it since. But then I wanted to create a binaural beat for the brain. So the brain does this really cool thing. When you put one frequency in one ear and one in the other, it will create the difference between the two. And I thought, well, that would be really neat to generate that, right? So this is 7.83 times 7, and it's 54.81. So the difference between the two is 7.83. And so when you activate them, now these are weighted forks and you don't really hear weighted forks. They're designed for the vibration to go into the body. But when you hold them right up to your ears, you definitely feel it. And if you do this just a few times, it'll take you from like a beta kind of brainwave state, and it'll just take you right down into that alpha brainwave state. You'll be like, right? So these were my very first tuning forks that I created. We use 10 forks in Biofield tuning. We use 5 unweighted and 5 weighted. So the other one that I made that's based in the Schumann is a sonic slider. And this one is 7.83 times 12. And I originally created this because these are kind of long, and I had a lot of older women with like weak wrists and arthritic hands. I'm like, these sparks are so long and hard to hold. And I was like, okay, well, let me create a smaller pair that does the same thing, right? But first I started with the sonic slider, and it's 7.83 times 12, because I was looking for a fork to use on myself. You know, so many people would ask me over the years, like, can you do this on yourself? And I was like, no, not really. You know, but I, from my own traumas, was very other focused, and it never really occurred to me that I could do it on myself or how to do it on myself. But then as I started healing my trauma and realized that self-care was important, I was like, oh, let me create a self-care fork. And I designed it with an extra long handle so that it could be slid on the body. So you can slide it on your face, on your neck. You just slide it. It's kind of like dry brushing, and it feels really great, right? So I was like, okay, I want to create a fork for self-care. So I had like 5 different prototypes made of different things, playing around with the Fibonacci sequence, other sacred geometry numbers, just looking for the one that felt good. And when I got the sonic slider and I put it on myself, I was like, oh yeah, like this is it. It's like a cat's purr. It is such a universally pleasing frequency. And the other ones aren't like that. Like you put them on for a little bit and then you're done. But this one just invites you to hang out with it. Over the years, we figured out that it's good for so many things. Like you can get a mosquito bite and put it on the mosquito bite. Just let the vibration run all the way down. It takes the itch right out. It makes things heal faster. People heal from burns. I was in a motorcycle accident a few years ago. I healed a broken ankle and was out dancing 4 weeks later because I was using this on it and around it. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make a pair for this one. But the 11th and the 13th, right? 7.83 times 11 and 7, they're terrible frequencies. They feel awful. The 11th is deadening and the
Mhm.
13th is like neurotic. And so this has just ended up being a standalone because not all frequencies are created equal, right? I've had so many different prototypes created over the years because I got curious about a certain number. And the ones that I used are like the ones that I vetted because you can go kind of bonkers with tuning forks. Like I know people have like dozens and dozens and dozens. I just carry the sonic slider with me everywhere I go, and I can do a full session in the field on the body, get people out of pain. It's such a super useful fork. So if you're only going to get one fork, I get the sonic slider, and this one actually has a boot on it. That's an amplifier boot, and these have handle extenders on them. So I invented different accessories to go on the forks. Um, and then on my other weighted pair is based in the Fibonacci sequence. So that is 89 and 144 hertz. So this is the 11th and 12th positions in the Fibonacci sequence. And so I see the Schumann forks kind of working with the body's electrical system, but I see the Schumann forks working with the body's underlying geometry.
The Fibonacci
Yeah.
forks.
Yeah, the Fibonacci forks are like they help your body to remember its geometric template or like the etheric template, right? So those work with your plasma and these work with your ether
That
body.
that intuitively makes sense to me. I did some research with the Fibonacci sequence before I kind of left to go travel and do YouTube land and everything. And I was doing seismic surveys, so we're measuring ground vibrations. But these are passive seismic, microseismic surveys. So these are just the natural vibrations of the earth without any sort of input. Let's say like a sledgehammer or like they do with oil and gas, they get these big thumper trucks. Because the earth is always just subtly vibrating across different frequencies, most of them from 0 to 50 plus hertz, which again overlaps with our brain waves and everything too. Um, but I did a variety of surveys. One of the tests that I did was I started making geometries with the different geophones based on the Fibonacci. I made a spiral with them. And before that, I was just recommended to either make a line or like an L shape, or if I wanted to put in a little bit more effort, a triangle or a circle. So after having some experience with creating this Fibonacci spiral with like 20 different seismographs and getting the data and seeing it come out better consistently, um, we did a comparative test all in one day, perfect conditions, and the Fibonacci spiral geometry gave us the absolute best look and understanding of the subsurface, whereas the other ones had more noise and they were a little bit more jagged in the data. And so there seemed, I mean, we know that the Fibonacci sequence is related to like the natural beauty of things, but there definitely seemed to be some ability to actually better understand the Earth itself based on that geometry. So I find it interesting. I'm not surprised though that you talk about how that can help you discover the like the body's own natural sacred geometry and express that to a greater degree. But I would like you to like what you said about the Schumann tuning fork. I find it really interesting that it kind of like feels out the areas that it needs to go. And that just made me think of how like because we have our own biofield and our energy and information and memories there, and we are conscious and intelligent, and this is made up of standing waves because you're feeling them. And the earth has standing waves of the Schumann resonances. And I believe the earth is a super consciousness. Do you think that Gaia in that moment is also like directing that flow of energy and directly working with any individual person that's using, let's say, your slider or you're doing it? Like, does
Well,
it feel intelligent?
yeah, I mean our own biofield is intelligent, right? And is part of the earth. We're not separate from the earth. Like we are the earth. We're made of water, we're made of minerals, we're made of electricity. Like we are the earth. And so this is just a way for the natural intelligence. Our environment is designed to support us, to keep us alive, to keep us well. Like all the codes for being a healthy human are in the air you breathe. And so it's all one and the same. It's the intelligence of life, connecting with the intelligence of life.
I see. And just building that, there is no separation, but sometimes we can build these mental constructs of separation. And so doing the tuning session, having someone just rest, relax, kind of turn off the body and brain helps to dissolve that. And then all of a sudden, boom, Earth, us and Earth, just Earth now is the dominant energy as it always is, but really can fully express itself, and that healing can then click in pretty quickly.
Yeah, and healing is just it's returning to our natural state. It's returning to nature. Because we're designed to be in harmony, we're designed to be in flow, we're designed to have a sense of connection to our environment. When we're not eating foods that we've grown locally and we're being exposed to news items from around the world, our sense of self becomes fractured from this fundamental connection. If we're wearing rubber-soled shoes, if we have a busy mind, and that's really what most people suffer from, is a mind that doesn't know how to be quiet and that spins all kinds of stories of separation. But we probably, almost everybody who's on listening to this has had an experience where their mind has gone really quiet, like up on high elevations, right? There's that quietness, and then you can see the mountains breathing, and your mind goes really quiet, and you feel like you're part of everything. We've all had that, right? And I think that that's the way we're supposed to live, is in that expanded state of awareness where we are connected to everything. There's a wonderful quote from Thoreau, where he says, "I believe there is a subtle magnetism in life, which if we unconsciously yield to it, will guide us aright." And that is our magnetic field being connected to the one, not just Earth, but the whole cosmos. It's all one song. And we're a part of it, but we've lost our way in thinking that we're separate, and we have all these layers of noise between us and that essential harmony. But when we start to break down that noise, then that sense of connection opens back up.
It actually takes more energy to maintain non-coherence than it does to maintain coherence, because the rest of the environment's already there. It's just, hey, just jump back in. And I also find it interesting with your Schumann slider that 12 times the fundamental mode at 7.8 hertz, or you use 7.83 specifically, is the one that worked really nicely. And 12 is the number, it's a number that has some very deep and cosmic connections. I mean, we have 12 months in a year, you have 12 hours and 12 hours, but also it's based on Jupiter, which orbits around the sun every 12 years. And have you noticed any sort of effects? I mean, you talked about solar maximum, how you have so much energy right now. And I'd be curious as to how moving and doing the biofield tunings during solar maximum has been different now versus solar minimum, but also under astrological transits. Have you noticed any effects from like significant astrological transits? I mean, there's so many different types. Great conjunctions between two big outer planets, an eclipse, new moon, full moon, oppositions. But if you could, I'm very curious as to your experience with both the solar energies and the planetary energies as it relates to your biofield tuning that you've been doing.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed some things. I've noticed that energy in general is higher on full moons and on solstices and equinoxes. There's just more ambient energy, and that can inform the intensity of a particular experience that someone might have. But what you actually made me think of is just slightly off topic, and that is a discovery that I recently made. So again, coming back to this model, this Taurus model, I was sitting in meditation one day and I had this sudden insight that the biofield, which I guess I'd been thinking was sort of smooth, I realized it was banded. And I realized that it had 12 bands, which this model actually does have 12 bands, and that each of those bands was comprised of 12 strands that were like fiber optic cables almost. And that made me realize that we have 144 illuminated strands rotating through us all the time. And maybe that's where this 144 strand DNA idea comes from, is this. And so this became very intriguing to me, this model. When you look at it from the top down, you could see an astrological chart there, right? I'm like, okay, so this is the 12 around one, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 knights of the round table, the 12 disciples of Jesus, right? And then there's this hidden 13, right, that comes as a consequence of the 12. And so like, so that's Jesus right there in the middle. And and so I started working with an apprentice of mine who's an astrologer. And I said to him, let's try something. Let's see if we can access my chart through my field. And so we did this remotely. He set up a 12-foot circle in his living room, divided into 12 houses, pulled out my chart, which he's familiar with because he'd read it for me a few times, and then proceeded to go around the circle with his tuning fork. And we found all of the heavenly bodies that were in my chart in my field. And we were able to actually tune my chart, which was so wild. And I could feel it. Like I could feel every house we went into, I felt different. We could feel like where there was some going on. It was wild. And so, you know, that's when you think about the luminaries, not just being out there, but kind of within our own electromagnetic bodies, it makes the influence of astrology, like it brings it down to earth. You're like, I'm electromagnetic. I have this electromagnetic signal. And this, when I was born, this is where those were. And even the movement of the heavenly bodies is moving through our own biofield, right? The stars are the furthest part of ourselves that we can see. As within, so without, as above, so below, right? It's all fractal. And man is the measure of all things. So, you know, so we are it all, and it all can be accessed from us, which is very cool. And it's a very liberating practice. Like when I first had that done, it was such a powerful tuning. So
The 12 houses, the planets, you can feel it all in the biofield. The sun is the central agent. Would that be related to 13, Christ, more that central channel? And when there's solar maximum, there's just more energy flowing through that central channel, perhaps?
I think there's just more energy flowing through the whole system, right? There's more flowing through the central channel. But if you, let's say you have a lot of energy, you've generated a lot of anger in your life. Your dad was a jerk. His dad was a jerk. And there's been a lot of anger and a lot of jerkiness going on. Even if you're trying to be a good guy, you've got like all of this charge stuck in that anger zone. So when you become more electrified, that charge that is held in the pattern and memory of anger is also going to get charged, right? So this is where you see people kind of losing it. They get, because whatever is not resolved in them and is still not in circulation is going to become amplified. So if you're depressed, you're going to become more depressed. If you've got digestive issues, they're probably going to get worse. You know? So a system that is unstable will become more unstable with more energy going through it. Whereas a system that is highly coherent will become even more coherent and stronger with more energy going through it.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. I mean, I mentioned that constantly on the channel, how there's individual variability and that ultimately, you know, the work lies with the person to identify these things and to do what they can to resolve them so then they can capitalize on the benefits of the opportunity of solar maximum rather than having setbacks as a result of it. And sometimes you just, like, I'm just recently getting over some little thing and it just kind of came out of the blue and it's like, okay, sometimes that happens, but you like to work with the greater potential that's more spirit aligned, you would say. So that's good to know. And we have that going all the way till 2026, down, descending 2027, 2028. So anyone that's watching us now in 2025, in the beginning, February, has a good chance in a long time period to really work with these energies before the next solar maximum, which will be all the way in like 2030s. And that's not guaranteed. We could have like, let's say, a minimum period of solar activity, though that's unlikely. But yeah, it's just really interesting to think about how all this connects together and how so much of your experience with it is based on your actual practice of it. I think it's really important because we can read books or this, that, but I think experience is the bedrock of really understanding things. And so I just like how biofield tuning is such a practical way to get that and to feel that. Do you have any experience with biomagnetic therapy?
Only a bit. Over the years, lots of people are always trying to get me interested in devices or, other approaches to
Yeah.
things. And so I got sent a lovely set of magnets and I played around with them. But I'm the kind of person that gets bored really easily. I have a very curious mind. I'm like squirrel, I'm always chasing my curiosity. And if something doesn't like really capture my attention, then I just forget about it. And the magnets were cool and I played with them, but they didn't give me enough tangible curiosity to want to keep playing with them. And I feel like I've developed such a mastery of the tuning forks at this point that I can do all the things that I want to do with the tools that I have because I'm a minimalist. What's the least amount of effort I can put forth to get the most return? And that's why I use just a handful of simple instruments that I can keep in my backpack because I don't want to haul bowls around or worry about them breaking or if the goal is to just help people with whatever they're stuck with in any given moment, I can get you unstuck in very quickly with one fork. Because I know where to go, I know how to listen, I know how to find what is stuck and unstick it and reflect that back to you, how it's mental, how it's emotional. And all these physical things that we end up with are patterns of tension. I've really come to the conclusion that basically anything that could go wrong with you, you can boil down to a pattern of tension.
And you did work with massage therapy, so you're aware of fascia, and there's been a tremendous amount of research done into that recently. And at the beginning, you talked about how you're holding the fork over someone's shoulder, and then their shoulder issue kind of resolved, whether it's like a locked shoulder or whatever. But I mean, they've shown tremendous progress in, let's say, like a locked shoulder with different massage guns, for example. There's a good documentary I watched that came out of Europe where they have these dual kind of massage guns specifically for fascia, and they were able to unlock frozen shoulders in just like 5-10 minutes and restore a ton of like range and mobility, which sounds very similar to what you did with the tuning fork, and they're both based on vibration. Yeah. So how do you think it's interacting with fascia? Or do you just have any thoughts on fascia as it relates
Yeah,
to the
definitely.
biofield?
Definitely have thoughts on fascia and just how critical it is. It really is our largest organ. We say that skin is, but it isn't because fascia is underneath and through and everything, and it holds memory, and we end up with all kinds of fascia binding that inhibits the flow of movement. And so that was one of the things that I discovered in using the sonic slider was that when I first started using it on my body, because I just started off using it in my face and maybe in my chest, but when I started this sliding on my body, I came all out in bruises. And I realized that I had these fascia knots that were inhibiting flow. And as I was stimulating them and sort of ironing them out, they were letting go and coming out with bruises. But what also happened was I lost like, I don't know, close to 15 pounds. It was somewhere between 10 and 15 pounds because I didn't have a scale. When I started to do that, it was astonishing, really. My husband was like, my wife hit menopause and suddenly developed the body of a teenager. I said, no more ever. But that is what happened. Because I was holding fluid in my body as a consequence of fascia restriction. And it was the way I grew up because I'm the youngest of six and I have siblings that are 6 to 12 years older than me. And I was always at the bottom of a tickle pile. I was always being, roughhoused. And so I developed very restrictive, constrictive patterning in my fascia that was inhibiting all kinds of flow. And when it started to iron out and to release and smooth, I got rid of all that excess fluid that I was holding, which was really very interesting. So that's part of the reason too why I created this boot, this amplifier boot. It's called the circuit boot, is because you can really work the fascia. You can get that edge and you can help to push it out. And the thing that's nice about a tuning fork approach rather than a gun is that this actually has a conversation with your body. It's very gentle. It like sends energy in, but it also gives you energy back. Like you're like, oh, body, what's going on here? I'm like, ah, and you can feel it. You can hear it. You're like, oh, okay, I get that. That's what's going on. So using a weighted tuning fork with a boot gives the body an opportunity to have say in what is going on instead of it just coming in with a gun and rah, right? It's gentler. And I also have learned to use this like a stethoscope. So just like sonar or LiDAR or anything, you send sound into something, it comes back with a signal. And so I can put a fork on anybody's sternum and just listen in, and I can hear all kinds of stories. I can tell you all kinds of things just by taking the time to listen to the body this way, which is a very, very interesting, right? So in sound healing, and especially with tuning fork work, we always listen first. We listen first, like what's going on, body? We give the body an opportunity to tell its story, right? Because we all want and need to be heard. I think we have a real need as humans to be seen and heard. And sometimes healing is just as simple as somebody witnessing and resonating without judgment, whatever your experience has been, right? It's a relief to be seen and heard. I mean, so many times in my practice. Now, when I encounter something in the field, I don't need to know what the memory is for the most part. I can do a whole session. We don't really talk about the timeline, the memories. Like, as long as something kind of like perks up, relaxes, lets go, I don't worry about it, what the story is. But sometimes I'll encounter stuff that like doesn't want to let go. And it's like, it's not letting go no matter how I'm going to the body, working on the body, going back to the field, it's not letting go. And I'll be like, okay, it wants to be seen or heard. And then I'll consult the map. I'll be like, okay, this relates to guilt and shame. It's around age 10. What does that bring up for you? And then I'll hear something like, I've never told anyone this before, but da 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 da. Right? And then the shameful story comes out. And then all of a sudden the resistance releases, we're able to do the adjustment and the pain goes away. Right? So sometimes just that witnessing. I had started to think that maybe I wanted to create a device, some kind of Biofield device that would like read you and fix you. And I'm like, we need each other. We need humans. We need a caring human heart and a mind witnessing us. That is what we really need. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've had a lot of these experiences. Maybe what is one of the most interesting stories that just immediately pops to your mind that or experiences that you've had with the Biofield tuning? I know you shared some of them earlier, but throughout your practice.
Well, a bunch of because it's endlessly profound, really, and endlessly fascinating. Everybody's different. I never get bored. I can't believe it's 29 years later, and I'm like still excited and interested in learning things, getting insight and understanding. One of the things that happens because the tuning forks produce all these overtones and undertones is that it makes things that are beyond our ordinary perception perceivable. Like I remember I was working with a woman, one of my early clients, another healer, and all of a sudden I see at the other end of her body, I see this giant Native American fellow with like a feather and a loincloth. And I was like, and I could see, right? And I'd never seen anything like that before. And I said to her, oh my God, you've got a Native American with you. And she's like, oh yeah, the great big fella, he came back with me from Arizona. I was like, So things like that, right? It creates it opens up the dimensions or the realms of perception. I've had people's past relatives come. This one woman was coming to see me because her father had been killed in a car accident on his way to their house on Christmas Eve by somebody who crossed the line. And this was just a few weeks later, and I'm working with her, and all of a sudden her dad was in the room. And he was, and he's like, in Vermont, we have a kind of character, it's called a woodchuck, like a real Vermonter and like tuning forks, he just, and he was like that. And he was like, what the hell are you guys doing in here? And she's like, oh my God, that's exactly something he would say. Right? So things like that I didn't expect, and certainly wasn't sure I wanted to see. But, I'd see spirit guides, animal guides, all kinds of stuff become visible as you resonate these higher octaves of reality. So that is wild. And I've had some incredibly moments where the room has become filled with light and just extraordinary supernatural kinds of things happening. But then I can also have, somebody come in, your knee hurts, and we just tune it, and then, none of that shows up at all. And maybe it depends on the position of the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever is going on in that particular day. But another character comes to mind, another kind of old Vermonter who came to see me because he was in pain. He had all kinds of stuff. He had pain, he had anxiety, he couldn't sleep. And I started working with him, and he didn't really give me any of his history. And so over the weeks that I'm working with him, I discover one crazy accident after another that this guy had had. Like he had rolled down a mountain inside an excavator, and he had been like thrown from this into that, and like really like wild stuff that had really messed up his fascia, his everything. And at like six death-defying weird things. And he was so astonished that I was able to find them all kind of in layers. And after like 10 weeks of us working together, he wasn't in pain, he didn't have anxiety, and he was sleeping through the night, right? So I don't think anybody's too beat up or too battered or too broken to not get benefit from this process. It's kind of like dent pulling. And, I'm going to be 57 this year, and I don't have any aches or pains or health issues. I have incredible digestion. I have incredible mobility, and I sleep great, and I have huge amounts of energy. And that is very different from how I used to be. I used to be overweight and tired and crabby and constant pain and inflammation and low level stuff. And, I was like many people are. But we've solved all those problems through this lens of electric health and sound.
So you've never encountered a biofield or just a person you could say that is unsolvable or unhealable. No progress can be made.
No,
So
I will
dark and
say, yeah, no, I'm glad you clarified that. Yeah, I would say we do really well with mild to moderate things. Anything that's like super severe, like really heavy duty, anything requires a team of other providers. Like you've got to get body work. You got to have somebody to talk to. You've got to probably change your diet. Like there, tuning alone as a standalone is great for some mild to moderate stuff, but anything that's really, really messy, deeply progressed, multi-generation alcoholism, when it's really deep, thick, embedded, and difficult, you need a team.
and so ancestral stuff and past life stuff, that's also in the biofield that you said. And you're able to work with that, but at some point there's a limit to the power of tuning forks. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the ancestral stuff is very fascinating because in the biofield, there are these features that I call the ancestral rivers. And this was something that I discovered first on the left side because we do get more genetic information from our mother's side. So first I found it on the left side, and then later I kind of discovered it was on the right as well. And what this is it feels like a river that is coming from above your head, and that's your ancestors, and it's flowing down like 10 inches on either side, and it's going to your descendants, which are below your feet. And I'll be going along in the field, and when you hit the ancestral river, the tone changes, like the whole quality. It's maybe like that wide, an inch and a half wide. And when I stick a fork in there, I can hear the song of your ancestors. I can hear, oh, your dad was an alcoholic, and his dad was an alcoholic, and his dad was an alcoholic, and what if this is a mess in here, right? Problems don't get solved, they just go downstream in alcoholic families. And all of that chaos is in there. We also have we have fixed points that are about the size of your fist on either side of your solar plexus that hold your mother and your father's energies. So I can stick a fork in that area, can tell you all about the personality of your mom, how it related and was formed by the ancestral river that she's part of. And then between that spot in your body, I can tell you all about the quality of your relationship with your mother, right? And father on this side. So when we do work in the ancestral rivers, it goes both ways. Like you are this moment in time, but you are connected through vibrational information to the people who came before you. One example where we see changes, I have two that are coming to mind. One was this woman that I was working with, and we were doing maybe 6 or 7 sessions. Her mom always came up in her field because her mom didn't have any boundaries, and it was really had been an issue. So we're working on her, working on the ancestral, working on, the mom sort of by proxy. And then she went to visit her mom. She hadn't been there since the beginning of our series. And she walked in the door, and her mom, who was the sort of person that always read like crime novels, and like she'd never seen her mother with a nonfiction book ever in her whole life, was reading a book on boundaries. So she was like, well, how's that even possible? And then I worked with somebody else, and we did a lot of like deep cleaning of their field. And after like 3 sessions, there was a lot of stuff that came up around his dad. He's like, my dad cleaned out the garage this weekend, and my mom's been waiting for him for 20 years to do that. right? So it definitely pollinates up and down. As far as the past lives go, that's speculation, right? Like I can cross check and verify to whatever degree I can. Did you have a traumatic birth? Were you bottle fed? Did you what anything kind of about most people know about their parents or what happened to you in this life? When past lives have come up, they've been experiences where I've been working like, in here, and all of a sudden I've had the sense that the fork is being pushed back, and I'll be pushed back out away from the bubble into some disturbance out here. I remember the first time that happened, and I was working with a woman. I'm like, wow, I'm being pushed back here to this spot outside your bubble. And it sounds like you're being tortured. And she's like, oh, that was my past life when I was being tortured in the Tower of London. And I'm like, okay, well, but it already existed in her psyche that was a
Yeah.
thing, right? So I would say very loosely, like past lives might be out here, ancestors' lives might be out here, but we can't cross check and verify it. And so and anything that was a problem in a last life is going to show up as karma in this life. Let's just deal with what is known in this life and not try to solve things that happen in other lives, because all times are now.
So you've discovered a tremendous amount. I think we've covered most of that, or not most of it, but we've covered a good amount in this video. And what I like is that there's still a tremendous amount of possibility and areas of exploration for the future too. And I would just like to see, I know I want to get more biofield tunings. It's great to hear that you actually do your workshops in San Diego. So I'll definitely do the next one, level 1, and get some more done as a result. And I would just like to see more people utilizing and practicing these sort of wellness techniques and practices as well. Because we have so much here, let's say in Western medicine, but we really need this area to also get bolstered up. So I thank you for everything that you've done and have discovered and carried on from people that were working on this before you. And you have some books, Tuning the Human Biofield. Do you have any other books, or is that
Yeah, electric body, electric health. So Tuning the Human Biofield is based on my master's thesis. It's full of academic references, right? Because part of the way that we legitimize this kind of approach is that we need to understand the science and we need to do studies. And so I have a nonprofit institute, and we conduct peer-reviewed published studies on the efficacy of biofield tuning. We just did a big study last year with 100 participants to treat anxiety, and we have incredible success treating anxiety with this work because it's just rhythmic, and it's about you're getting your body to remember what its healthy rhythm feels like and how to stay in that instead of too much, jumping around.
Yeah.
And so we're doing the science. We're seeking to really develop a well understood model that really relates to other science we know. Right. And this is something I'd love to talk with you more about, Stefan. Maybe I should just give you a tuning and get your brain working on what you know about the atmospheric stuff, because it is so fractal, and what is understood there and how we can apply it to this model. Because the better we can describe this model and what is going on and show through these studies its efficacy, the more people are going to be willing to accept it and try it and hence benefit from it. So it's a work in progress.
I'll definitely make a trip to Vermont, perhaps this spring when I go back to Pennsylvania, because that's fairly close by. So
Yeah.
we hope that we can do that. And maybe even I can rope in my friend Lynn, who does the biomagnetic therapy. And to
We can
get
get
you
together.
two working together would be very interesting, because maybe you're not interested in the magnets, but she loves the magnets. And so
Yeah.
you could do a biofield tuning while someone has magnets on them. That I could see that being very interesting. But
Yeah.
any final things that you would just like to present to everyone that's watching that you think are really important to share?
Well, one thing is, if you're curious and you're not much of a reader, these are both on Audible. And I do have a YouTube channel where I've done a series of what I call Sonic Sundays, which are Sundays that I've come on live and I've done a talk on a particular topic and done a tuning. And I also have a whole library full of recordings of sessions that I've done. When my practice became so busy I couldn't manage it anymore, I started working with groups. And then I just started making recordings. And so people listen to recordings. We just released one on balancing the microbiome. It was a classic example of moving from thinking chemically to thinking electrically and vibrationally, is that your biome is really an orchestra and a musical score. And it's either in harmony or it's not. And so when you think about relaxing, releasing, getting the rhythms and the tones of your gut right, then all of the little critters that live there fall in line with that. So when we start to think this way, it actually makes health a lot easier. It's a real paradigm shift, moving from chemical mechanical to electrical vibrational. But health is so much easier in the electrical vibrational mindset. And it's really worth exploring and starting to understand, because if you've been struggling with health issues that you haven't been able to solve, when you start thinking electrically, you'll find and be able to institute the resources to solve those problems.
Yeah, you're just working with it from a more complete sense, because
Yeah.
chemicals, I mean, if you look at a cell and you have ions moving in and out of a cell, that's some chemical kind of process. But what results from that is the larger cellular voltage gradient, which we know influences the expression of DNA and cell behavior, individual and group. And so that's what makes up then kind of a little bit more upstream who you are, and why a liver cell is a liver cell. And so yeah, I think it's just a more powerful modality, and it'd also be interesting to pair that work with, let's say, like traditional Chinese medicine or herbalism, certain herbs. So we have a lot more to talk about. We'll definitely have more conversations, but for now, if you like to learn more about biofield tuning and what Eileen's done, you go to her website, which is biofieldtuning.com, and I'll link her YouTube channel as well in the video description. So go check that out, send her some love, subscribe to her. And thank you so much for joining in today on the podcast, and just happy to be able to host you here, and hopefully many more.
Yeah. Awesome, Stefan. So great to talk to you. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks.